All right, today we're talking about palm leaf hats. This is the time of year where you're cracking these out, hoping that they're in good condition for the summer ahead. And we're going to talk about some things you can do to these to make sure they're going to be ready for you. So if you're new to this channel, this is the Startup Cowboy channel. If you like this video, please like and subscribe, but we'll just get at it here. So this is a palm leaf hat, straw hat that gets used all the time. These are historically really tough hats, but there are some places on these hats that do break down. And so I'm going to talk about a few of those. Some that I would call like kind of savable or rescuable, and some that would be in theory all the way done. Typically, these hats age really well. So some of that has to do with just the way that the fibers acclimate, to the environment that you're in. Some of it's just the dirt and the grease and the grime that gets in there that just keeps them, I don't know, just working and looking pretty good. I've got a few examples in front of me here of some of different ages and uses, and we'll just kind of talk about some stuff. So if you're like me, you take off your palm leaf after the summer and even into the fall. And that's the one thing that's nice about these palm leaves is you can kind of bridge the gap in time where typically people aren't wearing straws anymore because it's not necessarily hot, but putting a felt on is absolutely too hot. So palm leaves are a really great kind of bridge hat for that. And so when you take them off, you might not remember that part of that hat is damaged or part of that hat is super dirty. You hit your head on something and it caved part of it in. You just put it on the shelf, and now it's this time of year. We're getting close to Easter, and that's usually when I bring straw hats back out, or the last, foreseeable snow. Typically, it's Memorial Day to Labor Day, but once again, this is kind of a bridge hat, so it comes out sooner. So you put that hat away, you're cracking it back out, and when you get it out, there's a couple things you'll notice. One, it might be floppier or not nearly as stiff as you remember it being. That could be a concern. And then also it could have damage. So this hat here has damage on the brim, and basically over time, whether it's been high traffic or just bumping into something, that weave has broken, or this fiber has gotten dry enough to where it's broken and frayed. And so, I mean, it certainly looks cool, but if you don't do something to that, it's just going to continue on. So this is the time of year before you get busy and get doing stuff to do something about it. So I'm going to talk about this one first. So this hat, just from a stiffness standpoint, these don't have to be nearly as stiff as some of your felts do. They can be if you want them to be. I kind of like them to be somewhere in the middle because you're going to bonk your head on some things. You don't necessarily want a really stiff hat to crack and technically break over when it does that. But if I noticed it was a little bit loose, I would think about stiffening it. So what I use are a few different things for palm leaves. I've used starch before, which works really well. I just use a spray starch. You can put that on in layers. I'd recommend kind of doing it slowly because these are palm leaf hats. If you get them wet, they're going to change shape. Pro con on that. If you're trying to shape it, you certainly could do that. But if you like the shape that you have in it and you absolutely soak it with some type of stiffener, it might wilt or change that. So you could use starch. The next one is a type of shellac. So this is a shellac you can buy. People use this for furniture. I've seen people use it like glue. I mean, honestly, it's used for a lot of stuff. This stuff works really well. You just have to be really careful about how you use it. So I use a dilution of this plus some isopropyl alcohol. There's another type of alcohol that I can't remember off the top of my head that people use to thin this down. You don't want to take this and go straight to your hat with it. This is a type of resin, and what will happen is it'll just be too concentrated and you might not be able to put an even coat. So you'll have areas on that hat that are, very hard and some other areas that aren't. And if you don't do a good job, you'll also have a different discoloration depending on where you put it on the hat. So the floppiness of this hat, you could use a stiffener to fix that. Now, this edge here, you also can use a stiffener or a sealer of sorts to kind of protect this edge. So what I would do first is find if there's any large fraying parts of that palm leaf and go ahead and cut those away. So this one's got a couple different spots on here where you could cut it away from there. Kind of be careful because it is like unraveling a weave. If you cut too far, it'll just kind of start to unravel. I usually just focus on anything that's sticking up or out, and you can use fingernail clippers or small scissors and cut those out. Then you would take whatever you are going to use to stiffen this hat to basically seal that. Now for frayed edges, I don't think starch does as good of a job as it could. So using some type of shellac like this would work really well. So this bottle has half of that isopropyl alcohol and half of that shellac in it. And what you would do is first cut it, make sure it's clean, and then you're just going to put an even coat all the way over the top of the hat and then flip it over, do an even coat on the bottom. You can put a couple extra sprays on that frayed edge, and in theory, that's going to help seal that in. That resin's going to go from a liquid state to a solid state, seal that in as best you can. You really don't have another option for sealing those in unless you use some other type of binding product, whether that be super glue. I've heard of people doing that. Wax, some people do that as well. This seems to work pretty well. And just know, I mean, these hats aren't super expensive, so I wouldn't call them disposable, but you're just kind of putting a band-aid on something here. If you do this well over time, these will look really well. And that kind of brings me to my next part. When is something like this not worth fixing? So here's another hat. This is a kid's hat. As you can see, it's got all kinds of damage on it, and it's going to be hard for you in that camera to see, but it's got a frayed edge, and that fray has gone from that external binding weave all the way into the actual brim itself, so the body of the hat. It also has damage to the crown where you can actually see daylight through. Now, that doesn't mean that this hat is not functional anymore. It just would probably have a hard time being called a fashionable. So this would be a situation where I wouldn't even bother trying to seal that. You're not going to make any of this better with sealing. It certainly looks cool. So if you have a hat that you love, just know there's nothing wrong with it. You're just not going to be able to completely bring it back. And that kind of brings me to my last point, is choosing the right palm leaf for you. So if you're watching this video and you're thinking about getting into palm leaves, I'm going to point you into a couple directions here that might be helpful. So one is your function, what you're going to use it for. Don't get some hat that you're never going to wear. It looks cool to you, but you're never going to wear it because you're not comfortable in it. So just start with that. And then what you're doing in that hat. If you're somewhere where there's a lot of wind, having a huge brim is probably not going to be beneficial to you because it will be folding up all the time. And then also, if it's going to have high use, maybe consider getting one with a bound edge. So a bound edge means on the outside here, where I've been talking about these high traffic areas and where it breaks down, it has a ribbon which protects it. I don't know if you could quantify how long that prolongs the life of one of these. I would venture to say it's at least 2 more years. I mean, I think you could say 5 to 10 years longer if it has a bound edge. Obviously, this gives it a very different look. If you get on sunbodyhats.com, which is where all of these hats come from, you can choose different bound edges that usually match your center ribbon as well, and you can get a variety of colors. Honestly, I don't know how many different varieties they have, but it's a lot. Just consider what that would look like, what it would match with when it comes to clothing, especially if you're choosing it for a fashion standpoint. So that's something I would point you to. If you're looking at this, there's nothing wrong with one that doesn't have a bound edge. Just know this might be worth that extra little bit of money to get one with a bound edge, because it certainly would last a lot longer. So just in review, when you're bringing out these palm leaf hats, just assess them. If they need a little bit of help and care, go ahead and do that. Find a stiffener that will work well for you to stiffen it, or if you need to seal it, that's the best thing about those different types of stiffeners or sealers, especially the shellac. It's going to resist moisture, which, you know, we don't get a lot of rain where I live, but some of you do. If that hat gets rained on, it's going to shuck as much of that water off. So just think about that, and then be sure to make sure that your edges are in good order before you start using them, because if you forget to do that, you might find yourself here next year having to throw this hat away and having to get a new one. So I hope that helped you. Just a few tips about palm leaf hats. Once again, if you like this video, please like it and go ahead and subscribe, because we're going to go through a whole bunch of straw videos this upcoming spring to make sure you're ripe and ready to go for the summer.